Alright, hello guys, and welcome to my November forecast. We're going to be going over the temperature forecast, precipitation forecast, and overall forecast, so stay tuned for that. But before I get into the video, I would ask that you would subscribe if you do like weather-related content, and also like the video if you do like the video. Now, before I get into the forecast, we're going to take a look at the October forecast, the temperature forecast, precipitation forecast, snowfall forecast, and overall forecast. And I want you guys to tell me how I did for your city. You can either rate it or just tell me how I did compared to what actually happened. I love the feedback just to make sure that I can improve based on the areas that I got wrong and right. So here's the temperature forecast. Look at that for a quick second. You can pause the video too if you need to find your location for some reason. Here's the precipitation forecast. Here's the snowfall forecast. And here's the overall forecast. So again, let me know how I did, and I'll probably reply to your comment as well, but I love the feedback, so please make sure you try to do that. Really helps me improve on the forecasting. So looking at the November forecast, we see slightly below average precipitation from central California north into Oregon and Washington. I think that the pattern's going to be on and off when we're getting that jet stream to line up just right, where we're going to get low pressure systems to hit there. So I think more times than not, we're going to be in an unfavorable pattern for rain conditions there. So that's why I'm forecasting that. Basically wet for the entire eastern United States, as well as Texas, New Mexico, and portions of Colorado and Oklahoma. For the southeast and the eastern United States, I think that storm track and that jet stream is going to line up just right to where all these areas can get above average precipitation. Sometimes we're going to get it more inland storm track, where areas of Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas get in some of that, above average precipitation. And then sometimes we'll get more along the eastern seaboard there into New England, where we're going to get most of the rain and everything. So I think it's going to go 50-50 as far as where the storms line up in that area. But overall, you will see that above average precipitation will most likely take over that entire area, or most of it at least. Now, looking at the temperature forecast, we see slightly above average temperatures for the western United States, extreme western United States that is, portions of Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, Utah, and Arizona as well. Going to get that slightly above average temperature. Not above average completely, because I think that there could be some cool downs in between actually this month. And then obviously equal chances for those areas not colored in. Slightly below average temperatures for North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, into Texas, and then eastward into Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, portions of northern Georgia, and then really western portions of Virginia and the Carolinas, and then the western portions of Pennsylvania and New York as well. And all throughout there, we're going to have that slightly below average temperatures, and then that heart of that cold right there is going to be through Missouri, Iowa, Wisconsin, portions of Michigan, and also Minnesota. I think this is where the trough's really going to set up the most, right there in the central United States. Again, towards later in the video, I will mention, or I'll show you guys why that is. Now, to the overall forecast, this one's my favorite, by the way, overall forecast. I think it's the prettiest looking map. We're going to work our way from the northwest all the way to the eastern United States. So starting with Washington and Oregon, we see that on-off activity, like I said. Sometimes it's going to be a really active pattern, and then sometimes it's just going to be dead with nothing going on. So it's going to be that type of thing on-off throughout the month. And then south of you, more dry than average there for Northern California. I think this is really where we're not going to see much activity either way. Just with that high pressure system out there in the Pacific, that's just the way it's going to line up. Warmer than average conditions there in that orange section over Nevada, portions of California, Utah, and Idaho as well. Periods of active snowfall pattern there for the Rockies, basically through Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Utah, and portions of the Colorado Southern Rockies out there. We're going to see periods of active snowfall pattern. That's going to correlate directly with that on-off pattern there for the Washington and Oregon area. So when they're active, you're also active, that type of thing. Cold early there for that kind of turquoise section that's kind of surrounding that periods of active snowfall pattern, that section. So for Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, you're going to be cold earlier in the month. You're going to get these kind of troughs that move in sometimes. But I really think later in the month it's not going to be the case. Now, average precipitation there for Southern California through southern Arizona, New Mexico, and portions of Colorado, Texas, Utah. You're going to see average precipitation leading to drought relief, so not above average precipitation most likely, but that average precipitation is going to lead to some drought relief in those areas where you do have droughts. Very wet at times for Texas, Louisiana, and that little portion of New Mexico there. Cold conditions for the dark blue area taking over Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, and North Dakota. You're pretty familiar with this because it's been cold earlier in October and in September. They're very cold, so I think we're going to go back to a little bit of that pattern for you guys. So look for pretty cold conditions, especially in the northern portion, obviously. Heart of the cold in that purple section for Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Iowa, Missouri, Illinois, Chicago in there. That's where the trough, again, is going to set up, where you're going to get most of the time the most below average temperatures, especially in the middle portion of the month. Earlier on, it could be a little bit west of you, and later on, it could be a little bit east of you. But for the most part, most of the time, it's going to average out being right over you. Now, wet and chilly, especially later November, down there for Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Georgia, the Carolinas. You're going to be seeing chilly, especially later in November, like I said, but you're going to be getting that active storm pattern, like I said, as well. Snowstorm potential there for Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, and portions of Illinois. I think that this, with the way the trough is setting up, you could see an early snowstorm in that area, and I hinted at this in my fall forecast, I believe, that there could be a snowstorm in that area sometime during the fall, and I think this is the month that it could happen with the trough setting up more in the central regions of the United States. That's kind of the pattern you look for, with the above average precipitation, below average temperatures, looking really good for you guys if you want snow. Southeast ridge, especially early there for Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas, and southern portions of Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana. I know some of you don't want to hear that because you guys were dealing with that in September and early October, and I think it's going to come back, especially earlier in the month, but for the most part, that is going to kind of take over the pattern, like I said earlier in the month, so look for that, unfortunately, for some of you. Some of you want that. Now, frequent nor'easters and cold shots later in November, there for that turquoise section, taking over Virginia, Kentucky, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, portions of New York, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut. All of you are going to be dealing with that. Now, the nor'easters is going to be throughout the month, I think. Cold shots later in November, though, so the nor'easters aren't later in November. That's the whole thing. In that white section in northern New England and upstate New York and portions of northern Pennsylvania, we're going to be dealing with some snow later in the month especially. I think earlier in the month isn't out of the question, but definitely later in the month, I think that there could be a frequent storm track there that brings snow. So we could be dealing with some very early snowstorms there, kind of like the one we've been dealing with over the last couple of days there for northern New England. We could be getting a lot more of those, but intruding further south since we'll be later in the year. Now, this is the portion of the video where we're going to be talking about my long-range forecasting process and all the things that have gone into this forecast. So if that just bores you to death, you don't have to watch through this. But if you want to, it could be pretty interesting. Now, the things that go into my long-range forecasting process is current sea surface temperatures, ENSO, other oscillations, sunspot activity, analog years, and long-range models. And in the winter months, snowpack as well is very important. So right now we're looking at my analogs sea surface temperature. Now you'll notice that warm off the west coast of the United States and Canada is really hugged up against the coast, and then we have that cold portion in the very central Pacific. Now that's really what I want to focus on in this portion of the video, because I think this is going to affect this month the most. Now look at the current sea surface temperatures, and you'll notice that warm kind of isn't hugging against the coast like we saw in my analog years. It's more under Alaska and a little bit further west. This is going to affect the temperature forecast and precipitation forecast significantly. Now, the 7-day change shows that we're cooling down in those areas south of Alaska and warming up against the coast. So we're kind of heading towards a pattern that looks a lot like my analogs, but we're not quite there yet, and it's going to be a long process. Now, I want to look at the GEFS. This is the ensemble model for the GFS. Now, this is the 500 millibar geopotential height. So this is how we see troughs and ridges. Where it's blue, we're looking at our troughing, and where it's red, we're seeing our ridging. So notice that trough right there under Alaska. Now we see that ridge over Canada. Now, as we move on, you'll notice that the whole pattern switches. We see a ridge under Alaska and a trough that goes over the central United States. This is kind of the pattern I think we're heading into for the month of November, and this is really why I think the central United States is going to see the heart of the cold, and the eastern United States is kind of going to be in that average to above average temperature range, as well as the west coast. Now, the precipitation forecast, this is based on the EPS, which is the European ensemble model. So this goes through December 1st. You see our anomalies here. We see that below average precipitation there for the northwestern United States, and then basically all the eastern United States, besides a few areas, are having above average precipitation. Now, they also have areas like Iowa, Minnesota, the Dakotas, Kansas, Nebraska, Colorado, and some of those four corner states, including Colorado, having above average precipitation as well. I think this is a little overkill, and I'm not buying this as of right now. I think we'll be a lot closer to average. That's why I'm calling for equal chances. It could go either way. And then in the eastern seaboard, they have kind of drier conditions or average conditions. I really think that it will be above average precipitation for the most part for almost all areas. So yeah, and then here's my analogs. You see, my analogs keep the precipitation closer to the coast because they have that warm water hugging the west coast. So that's pushing the whole pattern to where they think the trough is going to be right over the eastern United States, whereas that's not going to be the case. So that's why we're going to pull that a little bit westward, all that blue in there, where you see the above average precipitation. You can pull that pretty far west into more of the inland areas of the United States. So here's the geopotential height according to my analogs for November, and you see they have that cold really far east in that ridge, again over coastal Canada and the western United States. So that pushes the trough a lot further east than I think it will be for November. Now here's the winter forecast. So you see my analogs think that we will be getting into that winter pattern because this looks really similar to the November forecast according to my analogs as well. Now here's the temperature forecast according to my analogs. And you'll notice that they look pretty similar to my forecast. I think they could be pushed a little bit further west though, just because we're going to be dealing with, obviously, again, the ridge being a little bit further west in the Pacific, and that drives the whole pattern really, guys. You don't believe me, but I'm telling you, drives the whole pattern. Anyway, what I'm getting at is I'm not buying into my analogs too much here because of the specific special pattern we have going on in the Pacific, and that's why I'm going to push everything a little bit further west than my analogs are saying, and that's really why my forecast is the way it is. Anyway, I hope this made sense to all of you, and I hope you really enjoyed the video, and I hope you would consider subscribing based on what you've seen. If not, you can check out some of my other videos and consider it as you're watching. Either way, I'm happy that you viewed the video, and I really appreciate it. Anyway, I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching. I'm going to be making a forecast for the nor'easter possibly hitting the United States this weekend, 2 days, so be looking forward to that. Anyway, I'll see you guys later.